Just you wait. It won't be long. The man in black will soon be here with his cleaver, blade so true. He'll make mincemeat out of you.
Ta-da! That was perfect. I'm Stephanie. This is Jack. Each week we pick a scary movie and talk about it. If you have a movie you think might scare us, hit us up on Instagram at The Horrible Idea or on Twitter at HorriblePod.
And this week we're going way back. We're in the Wayback Machine, going to one of the first talkies, Fritz Lang's M. Stephanie, tell us about this between the world wars piece of film school fodder.
Sure thing, Jack. So this was released on May 11th, 1931, directed by Fritz Lang and written by Fritz Lang and Thea von Harbou. The budget information, we couldn't find anything, and we couldn't really find anything about box office. I saw one entry on IMDb that this made $30,000 in the U.S., but I think, records are probably a little dubious.
Yeah. IMDb gave it a 8.3 out of 10. Rotten Tomatoes critics gave it a 100, and the audience gave it a 95. Wowzer.
Yeah. This is so I'm on Letterboxd, and of the film critics that I follow, I think every single one gave it 5 stars. One person gave it a 4.5. So this is definitely a critics and film historian, film scholars kind of movie.
Right.
And for listener opinion, we got a 100% approval rating on Peter Lorre. That's
dude has some bug eyes, and he uses them well.
He's got those Peter Lorre eyes.
I love that song. Like I said, the first sort of major, movie with synced audio was The Jazz Singer in 1927, and there was sort of slow rollout as all the theaters sort of caught up and got their speakers together and something. Interesting Jack fact: my great grandfather played piano in the movies back before they had sound.
In the theater as the movie was rolling?
Yeah, as the movie went
nice.
going. And when there were silent movies, he played the piano.
That's cool.
He had a storied career, many different
That
things.
is a very interesting Jack fact. I like that.
Thanks.
So Fritz Lang considered this his best film. Even more so than Metropolis, which I think is arguably more famous at this point. This is also the last film which Fritz Lang worked on with his then-wife, Thea von Harbou, basically due to the fact that von Harbou was unfaithful, but I think also was a member of the Nazi Party, or became a member of the Nazi Party around this time. And so Lang ended their personal and professional relationship before they finished their next project.
And good on him. I think peppered through this, we'll get into a little of the politics of it, but just to sort of give you an idea, this came out in 1931, and Hitler took power in 1933. So things are bubbling up.
Yeah, and I think
Germany.
I think it was either 33 or 34. He being Hitler actually banned this film. And I think because there was the depiction of just German life and mob rule and things like that in this movie probably didn't mesh well.
Sorry, did you say mob rule or jaw rule?
Where is Jaw? Also, last little fun fact, this was filmed in only 6 weeks, which maybe sounds like a long time, but I feel like movies now take a few months. And this was with big, gigantic camera equipment, and they were doing a lot of kind of innovative camera work in some of these, which, anyway, I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, although I have noticed that there are a lot of horror movies. Like, yes, lots of movies take, 3 months, 6 months, a year. I think Eyes Wide
I
Shut
was
took
about to
like
say
3
Eyes Wide
years.
Shut took like a year and a half, yeah.
But a lot of horror movies are like 3 weeks, 2 weekends,
Yes. Although,
a Wednesday.
yeah, and I think that's, I don't know if we've discussed this, but I think that's why, horror movie budgets can be so low. And especially, we've done a lot of these haunted house movies, and in that case, you've got basically one set. And so you can knock it all out.
I did notice this is the first movie we've done in a long time where no one was moving into a house.
That's true. Yeah.
All right. So what did you know about this film?
So I knew just like the most bare bones of the plot, that it was, that there was a child murderer in Germany. I knew that it was sort of a capital I important film, directed by Fritz Lang and starring Peter Lorre. But and I had heard that it had some very creepy moments. But yeah, what about you?
Yeah, I had heard the name, but I didn't even know that it was about Der Kinder Murder. But I had seen Metropolis, and I really like Peter Lorre in Casablanca and Maltese Falcon and a bunch of other stuff. He just has a cool vibe. His vibe is sort of different in this movie. He's not that sort of like weaselly scoundrel. He's more of like a psycho.
Yeah, well, and I was reading that, like, so this was like his breakout role, but that he was basically doing like a lot of comedic, like farcical roles around this time. And this was like his first big kind of creepy, dramatic performance.
I could see that.
And he really knocks it out of the park, gotta say.
He does. So let's get into the plot here.
Yeah. So the city of Berlin has been victim to a rash of child murders. Children even sing a macabre chant about the killer. The police, led by Inspector Karl Lohmann, have no leads and so begin conducting raids on bars and red light districts. The lords of the criminal underground, led by Der Schranker, the safecracker, have no choice but to put their own manpower behind finding the killer, or else watch their profits continue to dwindle. They recruit the city's panhandlers to find the child murderer, Hans Becker. A blind street merchant who sells balloons hears the killer's telltale whistle of "In the Hall of the Mountain King" from the Peer Gynt suite by Edvard Grieg, and sends a young man after him. As the killer exits a sweet shop with a little girl, the young man chalks an M onto his palm and then accidentally pats the man on the back to identify him. As he is pursued, he hides in a building until evening. He is eventually discovered by the gang and hauled to a kangaroo court to face judgment.
The police, by accident, trick a criminal left behind at the scene to tell them what, or in this case, who, they're after. The gang has taken Becker to an old distillery. He's given a perfunctory defense lawyer, who actually does a pretty good job, and gives an impassioned speech that although they all commit crimes, this dude is tormented and can't help himself, while everyone else does their deeds willingly. Just before the mob swarms on Beckert, the police arrive and place him under arrest. And as the film closes, the official judge enters a courtroom, and one of the victim's mothers laments that the trial will not bring back her children.
Yeah, pretty heavy stuff, this one.
Yeah.
I will say, so I think we should just get out of the way, first of all, that this is a 90-year-old movie. So there are certainly some creaky elements to it, There was one scene, I think it's when the police are first conducting their raids and they're kind of like marching through the streets, where there's absolutely no sound. And I thought my audio had gone out on my TV.
Yeah.
And so I was like,
It
Wait,
happens a couple of times. Yeah.
what happened? Because there was no like, so there's no score to this movie at all. There's no like, it's an early talkie, so audio is complicated.
Yeah.
It's also completely in German, so it's subtitled.
Oh, that's
So I'm
why
not
I
sure.
didn't
I
understand
figured.
it.
I know you said you had trouble following it. Um,
I mean, I followed it. I guess I didn't. Like I connect with plenty of foreign movies. I like this movie, but so we watched a lot of movies in the 70s, and 70s movies have a different sort of pace than anything after maybe the 90s, and this has even more of a different sort of pace. And there really wasn't, we'll get into it, but like the protagonist is somewhat like Inspector Loman, but he doesn't come in until, like, he doesn't become a big part of the plot until later in the movie. So it's
yeah,
sort of just like meanders all around different little sort of
I guess
vignettes.
and I am not a student of the theater, so I don't know. But I almost kind of felt as though the group of police and the group of like crime lords were almost like a chorus, and then
Yeah.
the so yeah, I agree. There wasn't really like a central person that you could follow. Like we know who the killer is from the very beginning. Like that's not
Right.
a reveal. Um,
And there's really only one, like, they don't like show the killing, but there's really only one kid that we see that he like attacks. The rest are sort of just like in newspapers
there's
and stuff.
Elsie, the girl at the very beginning,
Elsie
and then
Beckman.
there's the girl that he almost kidnaps before he gets the M on his
Right.
back, and then he freaks out. But yes, it's all off screen. But so it's much more like suggestive of what happens. So I will say, so I found this surprisingly watchable. Now, there are plenty of other movies from this era that are not watchable, really. And there are even some movies that I think, kind of film nerds love that I consider somewhat like homework movies, where you just kind of like watch it to like learn about early form or whatever. But I thought this was actually pretty engaging in spite it being so old.
Right. Movies in this era would be like the original King Kong.
I
The
think
39
didn't Frankenstein
Steps.
come out around this time?
I'm not sure.
I forget when. I think that was in the 30s, but I'm not positive. So, but this is really like a really prime example of like a procedural, and like you can see
Yeah.
kind of that this is where a lot of like current procedurals got a lot of inspiration from. Even just like going through, like they do like a handwriting analysis, and like
Yeah.
they like figure out what table he wrote his like letter to the press on. And it's interesting because this is so old, and these are things that like real life like true crime killers did in the 70s, 80s, 90s, like writing letters to the press, and
Right.
because he wrote letters to the police and they wouldn't publish it, and etc.
Yeah, and just like there's some of it that, basically the entire city was locked down and gripped in fear, and people were afraid to leave their houses. So I kind of, identified with that a bit.
Yeah.
And it felt, it felt contemporary. Like the plot it would actually be a really good movie that I'm sure people have done it in certain ways, but like there's a killer and it's messing with, ordinary crime, and so the criminals decide to find the killer. That's a great plot.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things I really locked into. The first little bit, like in the when they were first doing like the analysis and saying like, oh, this is the psychology of the killer and all that. I think I really locked into this movie in that scene where they're cross-cutting between the table of crime lords and the table of police officers, and they're both kind of saying like, "Oh, this is our strategy. We need to find this guy," and they're just cross-cutting back and forth. And at first, I couldn't notice that they were different people because they're all just kind of middle-aged German guys. But then eventually, I was like, "Oh, okay, these are the criminals, and these are the police, and they're all going to go on the hunt for this guy."
And that's... Sorry.
No, go ahead.
That's the first time we really get into what this movie is really about, which is bizarre tobacco smoking implements.
Oh my God, every room in this movie is just packed with smoke. Like every person is smoking an elaborate pipe or a cigar, like a cigar on a stem or whatever.
There was one guy who had like a cigar in a pipe. It was like a pipe.
It was like
and like throughout the movie, it kept happening because then like Lohman had this sort of like cigar and a stick that he kept sucking on. And but there were so many, and every time you're like, oh wow, there's so many different ones. They'd go in a new room, and somebody would pull out some like hearing aid bicycle pump cigar.
It was great, like an ear horn, but they had put a friggin' cigar in it. So couple questions I have for you. So
sure.
I know whenever I watch movies with Jack, like in person IRL, he pretty much always has something to say about the person's fashion. Like whether that tie sucks or that jacket is nice. As a well-dressed gentleman, how do you feel about the sartorial choices in this film?
Well, so we're dealing with post-World War I Berlin, and dressing for a black and white film is a specific thing, but everybody's sort of wearing lots of layers. Everybody's sort of got this sort of vagrant chic thing going on, and so I'm pulling up a picture. So Hans was wearing a 3-piece wool suit, a little too tight, a little awkwardly cut. Back then you had like the waist of a man's suit would come up to his nipples, basically. And
like a zoot suit?
Well, no. I mean, it just like it was pulled up real high. And then the pants were usually kind of like broad-legged, and then Lorre had this like kind of floppy half-ass bow tie, which was like a thing back then. It was somewhere between like a bow tie and an ascot, which I dig, can look nice, but in general he just looked messy and sort of.
He did have a interesting hat at one point, which. It's not a fedora, right? Like it was.
No, it's a Homburg.
Oh, yeah. It was like it seemed too tall, like to be.
Yeah.
But I know we were both a fan of this. I'm pretty sure it's Der Schenkert, the safecracker, who's the quote unquote prosecutor in the final scene. His trench.
Oh, tight trench, man. Sick.
Yeah,
Sick
I was into that too. I feel like even in the black and white film, it looked sharp. Like, yeah, I was into it.
But yeah, and then, just like me not knowing that much about German culture of the time, I was just like, hey, a lot of these guys look like they're dressed like Nazis. Or, hey, a lot of these guys look like they're in an Indiana Jones film.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing, too, is that I think, from what I've read and just like my perception of it, I think he was trying to portray the city and just this culture as kind of grim and dark, and I don't think that's just by accident that a lot of these people look sort of like I don't know, that you get just a vibe of drudgery and and like kind of under malice that's like thinly veiled amongst these communities. But my second question, and this is just a question into the ether, is 2 cognacs for $1.65.
That's nice, man.
I mean,
you give him $2 for the tip, and
yeah.
then just keep them coming.
You know, I wouldn't trade places in this movie just for 2 drinks for under $2, but it seems like a sweet benefit.
It's better than the 6 shots for $10 at the Continental back in the day.
Oh God!
But my only question, we've gotten into some of my questions, but is this a horror movie?
No, I think of it as a procedural thriller.
Yeah.
You know, I will say, the scene that really kind of like, honestly, kind of took my breath away because it was so creepy, is when there's like a little girl walking past a shop, and it almost looked like it was like a magic shop or something. There's like one of those spirals that's like spinning in the window, and she's walking alone past the shop, and you hear the whistling of the Grieg tune in the Hall of the Mountain King.
Right.
I can't whistle.
Neither can Peter Lorre.
I know, yeah. It was, Fritz Lang had to dub in the whistling. But so she's walking past the shop. You hear the whistling. You already know at this point that's what the killer whistles.
Right.
But you don't see him. You just hear the whistling. She's walking alone, and she kind of rounds a corner and looks like she's going kind of into a darker part of town. And then she runs into her mother. And so you're like, oh, okay, she's saved. And then they backtrack. They walk back around the corner, and you see, as the camera's following them, you see Peter Lorre has like ducked into the doorway of the shop, and like they walk past, and it just... And his whistling cuts off like when she runs into her mother. It's hard to explain it and give the same effect, but it like made all the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was very creepy.
And listeners, Stephanie has a hairy neck.
I do. Very swarthy.
So, who were your favorite characters?
I will say Beckert was, really, I think, was like the star of the program. This was his breakout role. He was only 26 when he filmed this. Peter Lorre, one of those people who just seems to have been born looking like he's 40.
Right.
I know
he
that
did have sort of a baby face. He did have a
little
baby
bit
face in this one, yeah.
But I was like, he's 26. But yeah, he. And, the speech that he gives when he's in front of the mock, jury is really great. He seems sincerely tormented and, on the brink of madness. And it's a really great performance. I also really like the defense lawyer at the end. When they introduce him, he's kind of like, well, I have the dubious honor of being your lawyer. And then I think he actually gives a really good defense of this criminal. And I also liked their Schenkert. The trench coat really worked for him, but he kind of stood out, I think, amongst this cast of middle-aged Germans. What about you? Oh, the other thing I have to say is that there were several good dog actors in this. Notably, the street merchant with the balloons he was a blind man. He had a seeing eye dog, or just a dog buddy.
Right.
And he was a really beautiful black German Shepherd. And I thought he was a very good dog actor.
Yeah, and the blind balloon salesman just had a little sign that he wore at all times that just said blind.
It did. Also, he had the creepiest balloons I've ever seen.
Yeah, they were kind of creepy.
I did not like those.
I liked Inspector Lohman, or Der Kommissar, as everyone called him.
Well, and then the criminals
Um,
told him Tubby. He was Tubby Loman.
Yeah. Which, I identify with.
I thought it was kind of a cute name.
Um, but yeah, I think so. Peter Lorre's character, in the beginning, he was fine. I liked him. He was sort of creepy in the shadows. You didn't really get a good look at him. And then at the end, when he gave that speech, I was like, "Whoa, this is really intense." And so I liked him even more. And he has that thing that's sort of like, I guess, from the era Jimmy Cagney had, and then later like James Dean had a little bit of this, of like there's a lot of like grab your own shirt and like crouch down, and you're like, oh, the pain inside my heart.
Yeah.
But yeah, I dig it. I liked it, and I liked him. I liked his performance. It was good. And yeah, I mean, I've had a few standout jackets in the movies we've seen, but the Safecrackers leather jacket was really
I thought it was great.
cool. So you're gonna have a new segment this episode, Stephanie's True Crime Corner.
Yeah, so usually I do a 6 degrees of cinema, but I really had a hard time thinking this one through because I really only knew Peter Lorre, and I don't know a lot of 30s films and actors. So I am talking how this procedural crime flick kind of really paved the way for others of this time, but also brings in a lot of elements of true crime that I think weren't even really talked about for a long time after this movie. And like they are introducing elements of like profiling even that really wasn't accepted as part of, criminal psychology for a while. Like it was a controversial thing in law enforcement. Like the handwriting analysis guy is talking about I don't know so much about how he's doing the psychology from the handwriting, but he's talking about his like urges and even Beckert himself is mentioning like that he has these urges, but then he feels bad about it after, and that he kind of goes into a fugue state, and then he sees the posters of the missing children, and he's like, well, what did I do? But so some of the things, especially like him writing the letter to the press, I was watching this and I was like, well, that's like, BTK did that, the Zodiac Killer did that. It's and then they even talked about in this movie like, oh, well, he wants attention for his crimes. He he wants like a kind of a glory for it. And I just thought, and this paves the way for so many thrillers today, especially, the movie that we're going to be covering next. Which, are we going to hide that until the end?
No, let him. Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert, we're going to do The Silence of the Lambs next. Ooh. One of our favorite movies. But yeah, so, just sort of it's same thing in that movie. Who Buffalo Bill is pretty much from the beginning. But that doesn't take away from the impact of, knowing what Beckert's doing. Like I said, that scene where he's whistling. Yeah, this has kind of been a rambling true crime corner, but but my point is, like, this movie is 90 years old, and some of these things that Fritz Lang is bringing into this movie, weren't really part of the common cultural knowledge for quite a while after this was released, and contained things that, I don't know about crimes that were committed pre-1931, but, the whole thing of writing letters to the press, I'm sure it happened, but it's still such a big thing to this day that, I don't know, I found that pretty fascinating. And then all of the elements that he brings in, like how they figure out that he wrote the letters on the windowsill, and they found the red crayon shavings, and all of that. I thought it felt really innovative for the time. Whether that's,
Yeah, I mean, I think yes, in film, so, so I'm a big Sherlock Holmes fan, especially when I was a kid, and so Doyle wrote a lot about similar things, about handwriting, and psychology and sort of crime scene investigation, and the Holmes stories were started in the late 1800s, but they were kind of actually in their heyday around 25, 27. So that's sort of like in the zeitgeist. That's starting to be like a thing that is in the consciousness, of like crime scene investigation as an actual science. Yeah, but I agree with all of that.
So what is your Jack's pitch of the week for M?
Yeah, at first I was like, kind of like last week, I'm like, let's remake this. Almost as with like I thought it'd be fun in like a Vegas sort of setting. Like there's a serial killer in Vegas and all the mobsters are like, this is really messing up our gig. But then I thought, especially when you wrote the notes about Lang and his wife, that a series about the making of this movie would be really cool, where you have like Fritz Lang and how do you say her name? Van Harber?
I said Van Harbo, but
yeah,
your guess is as good as mine.
So they've sort of written this together, but now she's having like affairs and she's starting to go to like Nazi meetings and stuff. And he's like, what? And then, in general, like the whole Nazi thing is sort of like really ramping up by 31. And then Lorre is from Hungary originally. So there might be like some weird racist
I think they both
stuff like
fled.
That.
I think both Lorre and Lang both fled Germany. I mean, I think Fritz Lang is half Jewish and Lorre is 100% Jewish. At any rate, they both, felt increasingly threatened by the Nazi movement. And yeah, no, I think that would be a really interesting, like dramatic retelling, and especially because from what I've read, Metropolis was considered a failure at the time. And, obviously it's well regarded now, but I think this Fritz Lang was like trying to rebuild his, capital, his like influence making this movie. So that would be an interesting element as well, I think, to that. And I love a good movie or series about the making of movies. So,
especially back then, because like the cameras were huge.
Yes.
Recording audio was like super new to do alongside, and it was like basically these two totally different like setups that must have been like really cumbersome.
And there was some really interesting. So, in talking about how gigantic the equipment was back then, I was thinking about there are a couple different times in this movie where they kind of like push through like a rack of coats or something like that, and then and then there's another scene where they're looking at a menu of sandwiches and the camera kind of tilts up and then it's like a different setting altogether, and then they look up to a window. And I thought, so seeing kind of how they did that, I think would be interesting as well.
And just I was going to talk about it more in my reactions, but just you bringing up it now, that there's a lot of shots that are really beautiful in like in a somewhat a cinematic way, but also in just like a photographic way. Like they're using a lot of lenses that have a very short depth of field sometimes, so you have this beautiful sort of blurred background. And
what do you call that?
Bokeh.
Oh.
And that's not used that much anymore, at least like not in that dramatic of an effect. And there's a couple of shots, like the one where the guy that the criminal that they catch and interrogate for a while,
Franz.
Franz, they pull him out of this hole in the floor, and it's a really beautiful shot because you have this sort of like I don't know what that's called, maybe like a rack focus, where you're like focusing into the hole, then you're coming out of the hole, and it's just a very beautiful looking scene. And
well, and I know you also really liked that. You sent me a screenshot of that beautiful angle of Carl Tubby Loman, which
there were some. Yeah, there's like a crotch.
He's got like a
Dutch
moose
tilt
knuckle
by the crotch. And that's the other thing. Like, I think back then especially, they're trying stuff. They're trying stuff, and it's stuff that maybe doesn't work super well, and so you don't really see it now. But the fact that they tried it is really interesting. And then at the end, when he walks into that room and there's all the criminals as like the court, and it's like it's doing this slow pan, and it's so many people in this room. It's like epic. That was really cool too. So just visually is very interesting. What is the horrible idea of this film?
The horrible idea.
Das horrible Ideum.
Is that German?
Sure.
Germglish. So the horrible idea I got from this is that the criminal underground is more effective than the police.
Yeah. And, I think you could take this movie two different ways. And it's interesting that Hitler sort of censored it, because I think you can definitely look at this movie as a pro-fascist sort of statement of laws and red tape and all this other stuff doesn't work in the end, and you just have to just do it. And if you all get together and you think somebody deserves to be executed, then just execute him.
Well, I can see that, but I don't feel like the film sides with them.
No, I agree, but I think it's sort of like...
Oh, you think like... I see. You think like Hitler might have taken that from it.
Well, I think it shows that is one way to sort of conduct yourself. And that is like a way that is maybe valid, but maybe not also. Because in the end, like, he does go to the police. And and I think it is sort of like...
Yeah, the defense lawyer the defense lawyer's speech is, I think, also sort of a statement against that whole mob rule thing. And then also just like when they show, there's that part where they are showing the crowd and they're all shouting out different things like annihilate the monster, kill the beast.
Right.
Like, and their faces look really like kind of grotesque almost. And they look like there's this one woman that she's like, kill him, and she looks monstrous.
And at the same time, like, this dude killed a bunch of kids. Like, yeah, kill him. Like, I wasn't against the crowd. I'm like, if they killed him, I'd be like, all right, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it is interesting, and yeah.
But yes, I think it's you studied film. I had 2 classes at a community college about film. So when we're talking about tropes and cliches, we're really more talking about, techniques.
Yeah, well, and these are things that, so I don't know that there are really any, I don't think any of these things really became cliches or tropes, in part because this isn't truly a horror movie. I think if we were talking about Frankenstein or
right.
Even Nosferatu, maybe there would be some things that were
The
the
cabinet
originators
of Dr. Kilgare.
that were originators of things that have become cliches or tropes.
Right.
This was really more like, any movie kind of from this era is originating a lot of these things because it's pretty, foundational stuff. But this is one of the originators of the leitmotif, but like a musical tune or a song being associated with a character.
Right. In film, at least. Like
Yeah,
Peter and the Wolf, and there's a bunch. Like, that's it. A lot of this stuff is coming from theater.
Well, sure. But yes, this was like the first time it was, or one of the first times it was done on film. And in that being in the Hall of the Mountain King associated with Beckett. And this is also a song that's just used in film a lot to this day. That, like, it was
Social
in
Network,
Social
man.
Network, yep, in the rowing scene. But and then, cross-cutting, like I mentioned earlier, in the cutting between the table of the mob bosses and the table of the police, and then there were voiceover over, montage of like, especially when they were showing the building where the criminals had been searching for Beckett, and they were showing, this is when Lohman is interrogating Franz about why they were there. Or just before when he was talking to the other investigator. And they have no idea why they were there. They were like, what were they looking for? They didn't take anything. And they're showing all the scenes of kind of the destruction they did to this building. And this is just before they find out that they were there to catch Beckett. And so, and I did read also this was one of the first examples of voiceover in film, because talkies were still very new at this point. So yeah, I don't know. Those are a few things. And the procedural is still a big thing to this day. I just watched a really bad one called The Little Things on HBO with Denzel Washington and Rami Malek. It was bad.
Oh, I heard
Don't
about
watch that.
Yeah.
But
I won't.
So procedural's still like a big thing. Talking.
CSI's been on for like 20 seasons.
Yeah. People love a procedural.
You know what this movie was missing is Mariska Hargitay.
Oh. Yeah.
Would have really kicked it up a notch. All right. Final reactions.
So, yeah, I found it surprisingly watchable for a 90-year-old movie. Another movie that I really like, an early Hitchcock movie, The 39 Steps, which I think is a great film. I think this was even paced a little bit better than that is. And, and that's with kind of the added hurdles of it being in German, as a person who doesn't speak or understand German.
And we both noted, I noticed in our notes, German is not the most pretty language.
Yeah. Shout outs to our German listeners, of which I think there are none. But yeah, so it's got some hurdles for me personally as a viewer, but I think I was pretty locked in to the plot, in spite of the fact that there's no mystery who the killer is. He's revealed from basically, I think, the first 20 minutes or something. And so it's really like I was locked in because of some of those formal elements that I found interesting, kind of the back and forth between, it's kind of almost like a race to see who's going to catch this guy first, whether it's going to be the police or the crime lords. And like I said, that one scene just really creeped me the hell out. The botched kidnapping, with the whistling. I would say overall this movie wasn't super scary, but it was definitely disturbing. And there are a couple scenes, like there's one scene where Peter Lorre is like looking in the mirror and he's kind of like manipulating his face, and he's got just such a creepy vibe that it worked on me. You know, so I give it a scare factor of 5. Really, all 5 of those points are going to that one scene. Like, the rest of it wasn't scary, but it gave me the heebie-jeebies. I also just really love, we didn't really talk about this in depth, but I really love the visual of the guy putting the M on his hand and then clapping him on the back. And then when he sees the M and the reflection in the window, I thought that whole sequence was really cool. Entertainment factor, I'm grading this on a, sliding scale because it's a 90-year-old movie, but I'm giving it a 9 for 90 years.
Wow. One for every decade.
What about you?
Yeah, I liked a lot of that. I found it interesting, especially the last few things you mentioned, because I think in a modern movie, you can sort of predict some of the things that they might have done, like that they didn't do, which was interesting, which was I expected him to maybe be like hunting down another child or something like that throughout, but really like that's in the sort of beginning part, and then after that one scene that you mentioned in the alleyway, the rest of it is just them hunting him. He's no longer like looking for kids to kill. He's like on the run for his own life. And I think a modern movie might have had him like have a kid, locked up or something like that, or have some more stakes,
right,
other than him just sort of like trying to get away. But amazing shots. Yeah, you sent me a Siskel and Ebert little clip of them talking about this a little, and they mentioned all the faces, and you mentioned it too, like there are all of these faces screaming or sort of like talking seriously. It was very animated facial work and stuff, and yeah, the tobacco mechanisms, just a stellar.
They did the entire gamut.
Smoke movie.
Yeah.
Scare factor, though, I will give it a 2. And entertainment factor, I'll give it an 8. And I would say it is one of those movies where, like, while I was watching it, I kind of drifted once in a while. But
I think that could be forgiven.
Thinking back at it, I remember a lot of these visuals. They're like sticking out to me. Whereas some of the movies we watched, like the next day, I don't have any memory of the movie whatsoever.
We're looking at you, James Wan.
Sorry, JW. What's coming up next? We spoiled it, but let's get into it.
We've been circling this one for a while. It's one of our favorite movies. Next week, we're going to be talking The Silence of the Lambs. We're going to be dropping that episode right around maybe the day after Valentine's Day, which will be the 30th anniversary of its release. That hits me in the gut a little bit. But in the meantime, please give us a review on Apple Podcasts. We're also on Stitcher. We're on Spotify. Wherever you might listen. Don't be scared.
Yeah. And a programming note. So, we're doing this in the quarantine, and I think it's partially a way to stay sane.
Yeah.
But just to sort of give us a little more breathing room, we're going to move to a bi-weekly because everything is better when it's bi. So we'll see you every 2 weeks, probably. If you have any interesting facts about The Silence of the Lambs or M, or your little Hannibal fan out there, Fannables, get at us. Tell us interesting things. Tell us what we should be looking for or talking about, or suggest a movie that might scare us. Let us know on Twitter. Email us at thehorribleidea@gmail.com. And
in the words of the management, Mr. Credit is dead and buried.
Word.